Hey, it's the Profit Answer Man, Rocky Lalvani. If you're new to the podcast, check out my interview with Mike Michalowicz. It's episode number 2. If you want to hear about each chapter in the Profit First book, go back and listen to episodes 3 through 13. Episode 1 is the why and how. On the Profit Answer Man, we learn money mastery without all the complicated accounting mumbo-jumbo using a simple system. Your accountant is busy documenting your transactions and creating a rear-view mirror of what happened. My guess is you don't even look at the reports they sent you. If you're like most business owners, you struggle with this, and it's not your fault. We aren't taught money in school, and accountants aren't taught how to be profitable. The Profit First system created by Mike Michalowicz works, and he certified me to help you implement the system in your business. Remember, the new equation is sales minus profit equals expenses. Let's face it, without cash flow, you can't pay your employees, buy needed materials, or pay your mortgage and support your family. I help you to do that and more, so you can focus on the parts of the business you love and receive the rewards for your labor and investment into your business. The stronger you are as a business owner, the more jobs you create, the better we are as a country. Small business owners are the backbone of America, and for that, you deserve to be well rewarded. Just remember, more revenue does not equal more profit. That's why we focus on the bottom line. Let's face it, as business owners, we tend to overwork, and we have to learn to create that harmony between our business and our life and our family. Slowing down actually makes you more productive and profitable, and so it's worth doing. Not to mention, you also get to live life now, not someday when. That's why I'm excited to have my friend Joe Sanok on to join us today. He's a keynote and TEDx speaker, business consultant, and podcaster. Joe has the #1 podcast for counselors, the Practice of the Practice podcast, with interviews with Pat Flynn, John Lou Dumas, and Lewis Howes. Joe is a rising star in the speaking world. Joe's a writer for Psych Central and has been featured on the Huffington Post, Forbes, Good Magazine, Reader's Digest, Entrepreneur on Fire, and Yahoo News. He's the author of 5 books and has been named the Therapist Resource Top Podcast, Consultant, and Blogger. Let's meet Joe. Answer Man Joe Sanok, it's great to have you join us today.
Rocky, it's great to be here.
Can you share a little bit about your business and what you do?
Yeah, so I am trained as a licensed professional counselor and also as a psychologist. And I had been running a private practice until 2019 when I sold that. That got up to 11 people, where I was doing typical mental health couples work, working with angry teenagers. We had 11 different clinicians and really got to run that business and have a lot of fun with it. But in that process, realized I knew nothing about business, finances, marketing, anything that had to do. I never have had a business course in my life. So when I started the practice back in 2009, I just was reading. And then in 2012, started a podcast called Practice of the Practice. And at the time, there were no podcasts about the business of counseling. And so right away, I was the #1 podcast for counselors. And so for years, just kind of did that as a side gig until I left my full-time job, which was working at a community college in 2015, and did the consulting and the counseling. And now I get to help people start, grow, scale, and exit their private practices. And through that process, really got a number of case studies and saw what was working over and over, where people were actually working fewer hours and getting more done. And that's where my book, Thursday is the New Friday, came out of that kind of process of learning with my clients, looking at the research, and then really discovering how the 4-day work week is actually better for society, productivity, and creativity.
And we're going to dive into that. Before we do, just a side note, why are so many teenagers angry?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things going on. So first, it's natural to differentiate in your teen years. The big goal of that phase of life is to figure out who you are outside of your parents. We don't want just kids that think exactly like their parents becoming adults and then moving on and having generations never improve or try new things. And so one of the natural life transitions is just to differentiate. And so based on how parents have parented, though, that can be a very positive thing, or that can be a very negative thing. That can come out in, simple ways like dyeing their hair green, or it can be in really tough ways like trying to steal cars. And so helping kids and teenagers be able to appropriately disentangle from their parents is one of the most effective things parents can do. But then we also look at all the societal and lifestyle pressures that are on teens now, compounded with social media and other expectations of who they're supposed to be. They're supposed to have their life figured out, all of that. A lot of kids just don't have the skills to figure out, how do I deal with all of these emotions? And then on top of that, we add just all of the neuroscience that's going on in their brains, where, as a teenager in your late teens, you're actually the only other time in your life that you have that quick of brain cells developing is when you're a baby, when you're from baby to toddler. And so there's just a lot going on for them all at once with hormones.
It's funny. There's no class in school to teach you that, just like there's no class in school to teach you money. And the things we need, unfortunately, aren't talked about. So let's take a step back into your life. 2012 was a rough year for you. You had a lot of things that you were dealing with. If you want to kind of touch on that, and then how did that change your view on time and work?
Yeah, so 2012, I was working full-time at the community college, so 40 hours a week, had my counseling business going, had just started a podcast, and had a daughter that was turning 1 year old. And for her first year of her life, we knew she had some heart issues and was going to need some sort of heart surgery. And so that whole time, trying to get her up to weight to be able to be strong enough to go through that heart surgery. And right before her first birthday, she had open heart surgery. And seeing this little, 11-month-old kid all puffy and staying at the Ronald McDonald House, it was just terrible. And then, 8 weeks later, we met with the doctors and they looked at her heart. They checked up with her and she was doing great. Now she is 10 years old. She has no limitations with her heart. She's, an amazing young lady. And just a couple weeks, though, back in 2012, after that doctor gave us the all clear, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And so we thought we were done with the medical world, that we could just, sayonara, we're done. But no, we had to jump right back in. I had radioactive iodine treatment. That year, my grandma died. Also, one of my best friend's wives had breast cancer. So it's just one of those years that just it was just like, how can any family deal with anything more than what we're dealing with? And, we've all either had that 2012 or we're going to have a year like that, where just everything hits the fan all at once. And what that made me think was, do I want to continue to live at the pace that I'm living? And the challenge for me was that I loved the job at the college. It wasn't a terrible job that I was running away from. I had an amazing boss, had lots of autonomy, felt a lot of satisfaction over the kind of programs I got to develop. But my central question at that time was, would I rather stay here and never know if I have something more inside of me? Or would I rather leave and potentially fail, flat on my face? And to me, seeing how the private practice was growing, seeing how the podcast was growing, it really felt like that jump into something new and scary and risky, at least in my mind it was at that time, was a big jump. But the reality was much different than the actual, perceived risk that I had.
And I think that's true for every entrepreneur, right? Starting your first business is always scary and you don't know and you just go for it. And as they say, you end up working 80 hours because you wanted to escape 40. And that's what we're here to talk about is let's talk a little bit about this, because I've heard this many times over, taking the time to slow down, to create the space in your calendar, and to do that actually dramatically improves your business productivity, which hence increases your business profitability. So what's the science behind this?
Yeah, so if we just start with, we intuitively know that when we give less time to ourselves to get something done, we still get it done. This could be true back when you were in college and you remembered you have a paper due the next day and Like, oh crap, I got to get this paper done. Or maybe we set a timer for ourselves and say, I'm going to get this blog post done in 30 minutes, or I'm going to just work harder to clean up the house before friends come over. Work actually expands to the time given. That's Parkinson's law. And we see that over and over. But why is this true? Okay, so let's just take a typical entrepreneur. They're working 5, maybe 6 days a week. They might be working after their kids are in bed till 9 or 10 at night. Say they decide, I'm going to set some hard boundaries. I'm going to take Friday afternoons off. So we're not going to go crazy, but we're going to just rein it in a bit. And I'm not going to work past 6. I want to be present for the family. So let's take all of that work that they put into those days, and now we've shrunk the amount of time that we can do. So say there's 20 really important tasks that needed to get done in a week. They're probably not initially going to get all 20 done. They're not, even with saying we're going to speed through this stuff, there's going to be things that take up time. So are we going to have the most important tasks done first, or are we going to have the least important? We're probably going to get the most important done first. So what data does that give us then in saying, okay, I got 16 of the most important tasks done this week, and the 4 remaining tasks I didn't get done? Well, maybe I need to just eliminate those tasks. Maybe I need to outsource those tasks. Maybe I need to reduce them or add some software as a service to automate them. Do I need to be doing this? I see lots of entrepreneurs, when they're back in the office from the pandemic, they do this, and then they've been taking out the trash and vacuuming the office for years, and they stop doing that because they've shrunk their schedule, and they realize, okay, the most important use of my time is not taking out the trash. It's not vacuuming the office. Maybe I should have a cleaning crew come in and do that. And so we start to whittle down what is the very best use of our time. In the same way, I know you're a profit first guy. We want our profits first. We want to also say, what is our best use of time first? What is the best use of our abilities first, so that we can keep leveling up and then try to outsource or eliminate the rest?
Have you read the 12-week year?
I haven't read it, but I've heard enough podcasts on it. I feel like I could recite the basics of it.
Well, it's funny because Profit First is based on Parkinson's law. The 12-week year is based on Parkinson's law. What you're talking about is based on Parkinson's law. And this is a universal law. I mean, the reality is we can get more done with less time when we focus and we are dedicated and we do the important things first. And I find the biggest problem people has is when you have something you want to do that you dread, it seems to be a massive time suck because you spend so much mental energy on it. So then it's a question of either do it first or give it to somebody else to do and get yourself out of it, because what you dread, somebody else loves.
Yeah, well, and what's interesting about Parkinson's law, the side that we always hear about is that work expands to the time given. The other part of Parkinson's law that he talked about was how over time organizations get bloated. And so he would look at, the British Navy, and how every year there's another piece of paperwork. There's another budget to spend. And over time, you get this bloated Navy that just can't really do anything. And that there has to be a realignment, a reassessment of just the bloating of a business that naturally happens. And so that side of it, I talk about also in the book because it's often overlooked. For us to be able to whittle things down and work harder and work smarter and get all these things done by slowing down, we have to whittle things down as well. And so that's the side of Parkinson's law that I think is often overlooked, but just as important as the side that's often talked about.
And so what we do in Profit First, we go through every expense and we go, do we need this? Is it important? Do we not need this? And can we reduce the cost? So it's kind of essentially going through your calendar and doing the same thing. And the processes in your company. Do we need this? Does it still make sense? Is it relevant? In big corporations, people do reports because they're supposed to do these reports that nobody looks at. And small businesses probably have the same way. It's evaluating everything you're doing and figuring out how to improve the efficiency of it. And as you said, some of these things can be outsourced to software. Today, there are so many different software systems that talk to each other, and we've done episodes on that, that if you can eliminate the things that you're doing manually that are boring and rote, and let somebody else do it or let software do it, you can gain a massive time advantage.
Well, I think that oftentimes we start with that discussion, but if we have an employee that's burned out and stressed out, are they going to do their best work? So I would actually back up and say, sure, those productivity books or books that say, here's how you do it, are great. And they're usually on one side of the equation. They're very prescriptive. Whereas kind of what I'm trying to do is say, here's a menu of how you can be agile and change and grow over time. But on the other side, we often have these woo-woo books that have a vision board where you manifest it to the universe and you don't do anything. And so let's actually bring the neuroscience together and say, okay, yes, we want to do profit first. We want to go line by line. But how do we make sure that that work that we're doing is the most productive, most creative, most out of the box, so that we can really understand this entire situation in a way that maybe someone else wouldn't? Well, we need to have slowed down over the weekend or throughout our day to allow our brains to actually rest. Because how most of us live our weekends is we're running to soccer practice, we're running and getting groceries, we're mowing the lawn, we're doing some, meet up with friends, but we're actually not mentally present with those friends. We're thinking about the next thing we have to get to. So then our brains are just spent after the weekend, and then we're spent during the week, and then we're spent on the weekend, and we're not doing that actual good work. So if we look at how do we slow down, and then even before that, we look at our internal inclinations. So we start on the inside, get that sorted out. Then we go to the outside, slow ourselves down. Then when we enter the work week, we get so much more done than we would if we hadn't done those steps prior.
So I know you talk about it in the book. You said there are 3 internal inclinations. What are those?
Yeah, so the first one is curiosity. So the research shows that there's 3 major internal inclinations. We have a whole assessment in the book. The goal isn't to say, okay, you don't have curiosity, so you can't be successful. No, it's to say, what's your baseline that you're starting with? Let's just be honest about that. If you're not naturally curious, okay, here's some skills that will help you develop that, turn that into a habit, turn that into some action. So curious people move away from just pass-fail mentality or thinking, ooh, this new idea is going to just spring up inside of me. Instead, they say, well, that's interesting. They have this inquisitive mind. I think about even the other day, my daughters and my nieces were over. So there's a 3, 5, 6, and 10-year-old girls all playing in the backyard. And they find a dead mouse and they circle it like it's a funeral or something. And they're all looking at it and they're kind of horrified, but they're also kind of interested. And you can tell they're debating whether one of them should touch it or not. And then they start asking questions. How do you think this mouse died? Should we bury this mouse? Do you think an owl will come and eat this mouse? Should we put it in the forest? And that's just how kids are. Anyone that has kids knows that there's a million questions all the time because they're naturally curious. But at some point as adults, we decide we have it figured out and we stop that inquisitive mind. And we find that we actually are smarter when we have that curious mind. So the second internal inclination is having an outsider's perspective. So we know statistically, people that are from the outside oftentimes have new eyes that help us reveal things. I mean, any of us that have gone to a new organization, come in, as a consultant, you're like, why do you do it this way? This is ridiculous. Why do you have all these acronyms? It's just slowing people down, or whatever the thing is. When you're new, you have these new eyes. And people that have that outsider's perspective often make those links that other people don't make. You look at Albert Einstein, you look at Elon Musk, all these people that were raised in a different country, they moved around a bunch, they have new eyes to see things that people on the inside don't have. There's actually a research study that was done where they had around 6 to 8 people around a table, and the researcher would hold up a color. It was either blue or green, and the group had to say that's blue, that's green, and sometimes they'd agree, sometimes they'd disagree, and they just kept track of who agreed with what colors. For the most part, they agreed these ones are blue, these ones are green. So then they brought in 2 researchers that they didn't know were actually researchers for other groups. And those people here and there would say that green was blue or blue was green. And these outsiders actually had undue statistical influence over the group. So over and over, we see these studies where they do this in a variety of different ways, where outsiders end up having more influence than they really should have from an inside group. So then the third internal inclination is the ability to move on it. And so people actually getting things done. So if we look at, say, a spectrum of, on one side, we have speed, and on the other, we have accuracy. We want to be more on the speed side to move on it and not get paralyzed by perfection.
As you were talking about the second one, I'm thinking, most entrepreneurs' spouses tell them what's going on and they never listen. They need somebody outside. And then they come home and they go, I heard so-and-so said this about my business and this is what I'm going to do. And they're like, we've been telling you that for 2 years.
Yeah.
They finally hear it. It's quite funny how that works out over time. But yeah, and that's a big part of what I do, I think. And it's probably a big part of what you do is when you have somebody else looking at it with a totally different lens, they see things that are clear as day. And that's the one thing that always happens to me when I'm talking to business owners for the first time. I'm like, did you not see this? Did you not see that? Do you know about this? Do you know this? And it's funny that they're like, oh my God, and that's why those calls usually bring tremendous value because they don't see the things right in front of them. They're so stuck within it. And that's true. When you're in your business and you're in the weeds, it's very hard to see the forest and you kind of have to step back. So you have a methodology in there. I think it's called FIRST for getting more done faster. Can you take us through that?
Yeah. So when we look at FIRST, so again, we're starting with the slowing down. Now, when we move into, all right, I'm going to kill it. How do I do that? So the first thing we want to do is we want to look at the low hanging fruit. And so F of FIRST is for fruit. So what's the low hanging fruit? Oftentimes these are current customers. We want to look at how do we amplify what they're doing? If people are, stepping down, do we have a service there? So with the practice, along the whole spectrum, we have a downsell and an upsell. So if someone wants to move faster, then we have an upsell. If someone wants to kind of bootstrap it and have it be cheaper, we have a downsell. So oftentimes we see these, people online saying, oh, you need your one core product. Sure, but what if someone says, no, I want to move faster, or no, I want to bootstrap it more? Do we have a downsell, an e-course, or an upsell, more individualized consulting? Next, we want to inflect. We want to start to act as if. And so this is really powerful where you say, where am I headed and how do I start acting that way? So for example, even with this book, I want it to be a New York Times bestseller. That doesn't mean I just say, I'm going to be a New York Times bestseller and send it up to the universe. It means then I say to myself, okay, how do I show up as an author that has a New York Times bestselling book? What do those kind of authors do? Well, they do over 200 podcast interviews in the lead up. They get, a large PR firm to really help with getting you on national news and placements. And so being able to say, if this is the goal, I have to show up personally and with that attitude, but then I also need to do the work to inflect as if. Then R of FIRST. So we have fruit, we have inflect, and then the R is to reinvest. And so oftentimes we want to take the profits out for sure. I mean, profit first guy over here, right? But looking at reinvesting, looking at how do we reinvest in staff that can help support you so that you can do your best work, reinvesting in software as a service, reducing that waste. All of those things are so important for you to do your very best work. So you're reinvesting so that you can keep that machine going. So the way that I think through this is I have all the different parts of my business that bring in the revenue. They're very consistent. They're very predictable. So I then have my goal that I'm working on of the creative goal. So that's this book right now. We might call it the gamble. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know how it's going to play out, but that's the gamble. I want to have everything off of my plate so that I can jump into the gamble as full-fledged as I can. But then at some point, that's going to have to go kind of into the predictable income. So I'm going to move it over. I'm not going to just keep filling up my plate. I need to now start automating a lot of that. So the things that maybe I would do before, I'm not going to do as much. And so then starting to reinvest in that way. Fourth is specialize. And so we want to continue to specialize more and more and more. You think about if you were a counselor that owned a private practice and you wanted to grow, would you want to work with a consultant that specifically helps counselors grow their private practices or just a business coach? Like you're probably going to work with the person that does the specific thing you want to do. They're going to make more money in doing that by being a specialist, but then you're going to get faster outcomes. And so people more and more are moving away from the information age and into the implementation age. So finding these hyper niches to specialize is that next step in the first. And then last, we want to have it be time limited. And we often hear people say, oh, you need a 5-year goal. I would hope, Rocky, that you're different now than you were 5 years ago. And that 5 years ago, you would have been really bad at setting goals for yourself today. The same is true for looking ahead 5 years. So we want to look at 6, maybe 12-month goals that we can rapidly jump into, get feedback on, and then iterate over time.
And that's why I love the 12-week year, because they talk about quarterly goals, but your quarterly goal is what used to be a yearly goal. And you run a little bit faster and a little bit more focused. So now that Thursday's the new Friday, what are we supposed to do on Friday?
Yeah, well, I think that this really points to what, I know you're into Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, so am I. Like, who's the enemy here? I would say it's really the industrialists. So in 1926, Henry Ford gave us the 40-hour work week. It was to sell more cars to his own people. He had the idea that he wouldn't be able to sell cars to people that just wanted to get to work faster, but if they had time off, then they'd want to make the most out of that time off. And it worked. So less than 100 years ago, we're given this thing that feels so true to who we are. And that industrialist mindset is everywhere. We have overvalued work and undervalued fun. And so what I recommend to people is that when you look at your weekend, you add one thing and you remove one thing. So add one thing in that's scheduled, that's predictable, that for you fills you up. It doesn't have to be on the weekend. It can just be something throughout the week that you add that is for you only. So for example, every Wednesday night, I do improv with a local improv group. I laugh harder in that hour and a half than I do the rest of the week. That's my ab workout for the day that day. To make other improvers laugh is just such a highlight of my week. That's a non-negotiable. So I have childcare set up for my kids. I'm a single dad. I make it happen every single week. And so that could be on Fridays that, you have a watercolor class, or you go for a walk with a friend, or you add something in that is just for you. And then we want to take something away. So this could be, I'm sick of mowing my lawn. Every single weekend, I dread it. To pay the kid next door $30 to mow my lawn is totally worth it to not have that hang over my head. Maybe your garage has been messy and you're like, I don't want to put the time into organizing it. So maybe you hire someone or hire the neighbor kid or your kids to organize the garage. Removing something from your plate that you just give yourself permission to say, I am not going to do this. And when you start to do that, you see how your mood, your attitude, everything starts to shift, where you have these things you look forward to and these things that you no longer are dreading. And then on Monday morning, when you return to work or whatever your first day is, you're ready to show up and get things done. And as you do this over time, you're starting to add in more and more that really gives you life, matches the neuroscience, and then allows you to do better work when you're back in the office.
And for me, that's a big thing. If there's stuff that you don't like to do, get it off of your plate. Like, just find somebody or some way to do it, because it really drags down the rest of your week. Something that probably only takes 15 or 20 minutes turns into a 2-hour time waste because you just dread it so much. And that's the big part of it is learning to let go and understanding that even if you let go, sometimes the people you let go to will do it 50% better than you. On average, though, if it's in your zone of genius, chances are they're going to do it 20% worse than you. But accept that. Understand that, hey, I don't like to do this, or I don't want to do this. I'm going to give it to somebody else, but it isn't going to be perfect. And that's okay. Not everyone.
And I would actually argue that it's not going to be perfect now. That really it's oftentimes me understanding myself to be able to hand something over. So a number of years ago, I handed over my email to my director of details. And so she goes through my email and then she stars the ones that I need to pay attention to and respond to. And she texts me if there's certain people that send me an email. So those highest level people, I get a text from my assistant with consulting clients, if it's my attorney, if it's my accountant, all those people that if that comes through, I want to know immediately. So now my email I approach with, it's not all the same. Those 200 emails a day I get are not all equal. There's many that I should just be ignoring. But it took a while for her to continue to learn. And it's a constant feedback. Feedback isn't just for when we do our annual review with somebody. It needs to be ongoing. And so even down to if there was an email, especially early on, still right now it doesn't happen very often, but if there was an email that I thought she could have responded to, I would BCC her. And she knew if she got BCC'd on an email, she needs to add that to the library of responses and say, that's something I should have responded to, and Joe doesn't want to respond to these in the future. Now, if she kept doing that same email 10 or 20 times, we'd have a stronger conversation. But I set up the anchor that she knew if she got a BCC, that then triggers all these things she needs to do. And so that's where we need to give that ongoing feedback so that that person now can actually do a better job at it than we would have done if we were burnt out doing the email or whatever the equivalent is.
You've created systems and processes and feedback loops and self-improvement and all of the things that we all need to do. But sometimes we just get too busy to do it, right? Which is what this is all about, is take the time to slow down, because as you do things, life gets a lot easier. And that's what Mike has another book called Clockwork. And that's what Clockwork is all about. Getting out of the business and letting other people run it and creating those systems and processes and feedback loops to continuously improve and make things better. And email is one of those massive time sucks. And I know I get 100 plus emails a day. And the first thing I was looking at maybe hiring someone to do it. And then I realized, why am I paying somebody to go through emails that I don't even want? Why don't you start getting rid of all the emails?
Yeah.
And so that's what I did, was like unsubscribe or move them to a different email address. And I was going to look at them. I've never gone and looked at them. I just forgot about it and said they weren't relevant. And so that's a big part of it. I think email management is definitely one of those big time sucks.
Yeah, and I think that people think that creating these systems needs to be this gigantic task. I think for me, it's noticing the frustrations and then communicating those. So for example, right before this, there was a podcaster that accidentally double booked today. And that person got an email about us having a 10 o'clock and us having a 12:30. Now, then they weren't ready at the 10 o'clock. Now, that happens. Things like that happen. So I just sent a quick voice text to my assistant saying, hey, when you're reviewing my week, can you also just notice if there's 2 different times, not back to back with the same person? Just reach out to them and make sure that they, wanted both those times, or if we need to delete one, that they know that. So that took me, I think it was an 18-second voice text. So she knows she's going to go in and do that now. Now, if she doesn't do it, then that's where we need to look at that next implementation step. But ideally, you get to the point where it's quick feedback like that. Hey, this happened today. Nobody's fault, but hey, let's just work on making sure we change this for the future. That wasn't her fault. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't my fault. It just happened. Now let's work upstream and say, how are we going to change this to not, like, I wasted 15 minutes waiting for this person to get onto the call. And so, like, if I'm going to be efficient, then I need to make sure my systems are efficient too.
And part of what you said is taking the emotion out of it.
Yeah.
Which is a big part of it. Our emotions suck up too much energy. And if we can take our emotions out and say, hey, this happened, let's make a correction so that it doesn't happen in the future. And as you said, if it doesn't change, well, then we have a conversation, but at least you start addressing these things, and nothing changes overnight. By little, you will definitely achieve the results that you want to get. If people would like to read the book, connect with your work, find you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, Thursday is the new Friday, is available wherever you get your books. So if that's your local bookstore, you can have them pre-order it. You can order it on Amazon or anywhere online, just wherever you prefer to get it. Thursday is the new Friday is the name of the book. And over at joesanok.com is where we're listing all the different experiments people are submitting. So we believe that this isn't just my work. This isn't just for me, that we need to learn communally. And that, the way that, Rocky, you're going to apply something like this, or the way that Mike would, or that I would, is all going to be different. So we want to list those types of experiments so that we can start to learn from each other. Also, if people are hosting book clubs that are open to the public, we're going to list those there. So joesanok.com is the hub for all of my writing and all of my keynotes.
And I will put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Rocky.
Parkinson's law is everywhere because it's a universal law. It's the underlying principles of profit first. Time and resources, like money, expand and get used up unless we learn to constrain them. We can do more with less when we slow down and think through the issues and how best to solve them. The best entrepreneurs do just that. Some of them walk away for weeks to get clarity. So take the time to slow down and think through. It will lead to more profits. scheduling link in the show notes to get on my calendar for a good fit conversation to see if I'm the right person to support you and how I can help you. If you want to learn about living the life of your dreams, check out my other podcast, Richer Soul. As we close out, let's repeat the mantra. Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. Have an abundant and profitable week.